Welcome to Mystic Dragon Chronicles, where every tale holds a lesson. Beyond fantasy, lesson that last. Let's step into the story.
The smoke was the first thing, thick and black, rolling up from the valley floor in slow, greasy columns that bent sideways in the wind. Rail smelled it before he saw the convoy. Burnt metal, melted insulation, and underneath all of that, something older and sharper. The smell of a fight that was already over. He crested the ridge with Gale on his left and Tull 2 steps behind, and the whole picture opened up below them. 7 Vorkai cargo haulers, wrecked. 3 were flipped on their sides. 1 had burned so completely it was now just a skeleton of black ribs sticking out of the earth. The attackers, raiders, the briefing had said, no further details, were long gone. What remained was the aftermath, and the Vorkai warriors already moving through it. There were 12 of them, big and scale-plated, their armor the color of deep water. They moved through the wreckage the way soldiers always move through wreckage. Efficiently. Cataloging. Not looking for survivors. Looking for assets. Rail watched one of them step over something half covered by a collapsed door panel without stopping, without looking down. He didn't know what was under the panel. Probably nothing. But the not stopping bothered him in a way he couldn't name. We're perimeter, Gale said. She was reading the mission brief off her visor. No entry into the primary debris field. The Vorkai handle their own recovery ops. Noted, Rail said. That means you specifically, she added. I heard you. They spread out along the ridge. Tull found a good sight line and settled in. Gale started running comms checks. Rail walked the edge of the slope, keeping the debris field in view, watching the Vorkai move. He had worked beside Vorkai units twice before. He knew they were not cold because they didn't care. They were cold because caring for them happened inside, locked behind the scale and the posture and the silence. A Vorkai warrior could lose his whole squad and walk out of the wreckage without his face changing once. That wasn't absence of grief. That was a different kind of grief. One that didn't need witnesses. Rail understood that. He respected it, even. But he still watched the Vorkai step over things. He was near the eastern edge of the slope when he heard it. Small. Almost nothing. Under the wind and the distant creak of cooling metal. A sound like something trying to breathe and not quite managing it. He stopped. Gale's voice in his earpiece. Rail, don't. I haven't done anything. You have your listening face on. He followed the sound down the slope, moving carefully, staying low. The source was a cargo pod, ovoid, roughly the size of a ground vehicle, cracked down the middle and half buried under a section of hull plating. The breathing sound was coming from inside the crack. He got down on his hands and knees and looked in. The inside of the pod was dark except for a thin strip of gray light where the crack opened. Rail pulled his torch and angled it in, and the beam caught the shape immediately. Small. Very small. Curled up against the far interior wall with its wings folded flat and its tail wrapped around its body in a tight spiral. A hatchling. He had never seen one up close. She was pale gold, almost white in the torchlight, the color of old ivory, with wing membranes that caught the light silver at the edges. She was maybe 60 centimeters from nose to tail, thin in a way that made the small ridge of her spine visible under the scales. She was shaking. Her eyes were open, amber, large for her face, fixed on the torchlight without really seeing it. Rail. Gale's voice was quieter now. There are 12 Vorkai warriors 20 meters from you. I know. If you touch a Vorkai hatchling without. She's alone. She's cold. She's been here since the attack. Silence on the line. Rail took off his outer jacket. It was heavy canvas, lined, still warm from his body heat. He folded it loosely, leaned into the crack as far as his shoulders allowed, and he moved slowly. He kept his movements small and deliberate. He spoke as he moved. Not words, exactly, just sound. Low and steady. The kind of sound that meant nothing was going to happen fast. The hatchling watched him. She did not move. He got the jacket underneath her. He got his hands under the jacket. He lifted. She went rigid the moment he touched her, every muscle locked, a small hard statue of fear, and for a second he thought she was going to fight. But she didn't fight. She just froze. And then, 3 seconds later, something in her seemed to run out of the energy required to be afraid. She went still in a different way, a softer way. He got himself out of the crack and stood up, holding her against his chest, jacket wrapped around her. She was lighter than he expected. Her heart was going very fast. He looked up. Vron was standing 4 meters away. He had not been there 30 seconds ago. The Vorkai warrior was half a head taller than Rael and twice as broad, his hand already on the short blade at his side, his eyes fixed on the hatchling in the human's arms. The valley went quiet. Nobody moved. Vron's hand stayed on the blade, not drawing it, not releasing it, just resting there, the way a weight rests on a scale when it hasn't decided which way to tip. Rael did not step back. He didn't raise his hands, either. He was holding a baby dragon wrapped in a canvas jacket, and raising his hands wasn't really an option, so he just stood there and let Vron look. From up on the ridge, Gale's voice came through the earpiece, very controlled, very even. I have eyes on you. Tull has eyes on you. We are not drawing on the Vorkai. Good, Rael said quietly. I'm telling you that so you know we're watching, not so you feel safe. You are not safe. Also good. Vron's eyes moved from the hatchling to Rael's face. The Vorkai warrior was reading him, not his rank, not his gear, but his face, the way someone reads a face when they are trying to figure out what kind of threat is in front of them. Rael had been read like that before. He kept his expression simple and open. He had nothing to hide. You will give her to me, Vron said. His voice was deep and slightly rasped at the edges, the way Vorkai voices got when they were working hard to stay level. I will, Rael said. Just give me a second. Now. She went calm when I picked her up. Rael kept his voice low. She was shaking. She's not shaking now. Give me 1 more minute with her, and then I'll hand her over. Vron's jaw tightened. Behind him, 2 other Vorkai warriors had drifted closer. One of them said something in their own language. Vron did not answer. Gale again. Colonel Doss is coming down the slope. He sounds unhappy. He's always unhappy. He sounds specifically unhappy about you. Rael looked down at the hatchling in his arms. She had not moved. Her eyes were half closed now, the amber dimmed to something more distant. Her breathing had slowed, still shallow, but slower. The fast, frantic heartbeat he had felt through the jacket when he first lifted her had settled into something less desperate. She had pressed the top of her head against the base of his throat. He didn't think she had done it on purpose. He thought she had just found the warmest point of contact and moved toward it without deciding to. He heard Doss arrive before he saw him. Boots on gravel, quick and heavy, the particular rhythm of a man who was very senior and very irritated. Corporal. Doss stopped at his shoulder. His voice was command quiet. You are holding a Vorkai hatchling. Yes, sir. Without authorization. She was alone inside a cracked cargo pod, sir. She'd been there since the attack. A pause. You crawled into a wreck in a Vorkai debris field to retrieve a hatchling that was not your species, not your unit, and not your problem. Rael said nothing, because the answer was yes, and they both knew it. Doss exhaled through his nose. Then he turned to Vron and the 2 of them began talking, the tense, formal kind of talking that was more about posture than words. Rael stopped listening and looked at the hatchling again. Her name, he would learn later, was Sarah. He didn't know that yet. He didn't know anything about her. He just knew she was small and pale gold, and her silver-edged wings were folded tight like she was trying to take up less space than she already did. Like she had learned, somewhere in her short life, that being small was safer. He had seen that in people before. He recognized it. Lieutenant Bain appeared from somewhere behind Doss, face rigid. Corporal Rael, you will hand the hatchling to the Vorkai and step back. Yes, sir. Rael looked at Vron. She's ready. But when he moved to transfer her, the hatchling made a sound. Not loud. A small, thin note, somewhere between a hiss and a keen, and she pressed harder against his chest. Everything stopped again. Vron stared. His hand had come off the blade at some point without Rael noticing. One of the Vorkai warriors behind him said something low. Another answered. The tone was different from before. Still tense, but different. Gale's voice in Rael's ear, quieter than usual. What was that sound she made? I don't know. It didn't sound angry. No, Rael said. It didn't. Vron took 3 steps forward and stopped just out of arm's reach. He looked at the hatchling for a long time. His expression had not changed, exactly. It was still hard and still watchful, but something in the set of it had shifted. The way a wall shifts when something behind it moves. Rael waited. Finally, Vron said. She is not contaminated. Doss looked up. Bane blinked. Vron was not speaking to them. He was speaking to the warriors behind him. He said something else in Vorkai, slower, like he was deciding the words as they came out. Then he looked at Rail. You may hold her until she is stable. Then she comes to us. Rail nodded once. Understood. Vron turned and walked back toward the wreckage. After a moment, the other warriors followed. Bane looked at Rail with the expression of a man who had just watched something he had no category for. Then he walked away too. Doss stayed. He said nothing for a few seconds. Then, very quietly, "Do not make this complicated, Corporal." "No, sir," Rail said. He looked down at the hatchling. Her eyes were fully closed now. She was still not shaking. Gale had not meant to record it. Her helmet camera was always running. Standard procedure, perimeter duty, you document everything and sort it later. She had forgotten it was on. By the time she remembered, the footage had already been filed with the daily report, which was automatically distributed to Joint Command, which meant 17 different species communication relays picked it up inside of 4 hours. By the following morning, every network in the Frontier Alliance had it. Rail found out when Tull came into the temporary billet looking like someone had told him a very confusing joke, and he wasn't sure if he was allowed to laugh. Tull set a datapad on the table next to Rail's bunk without saying a word. Rail looked at the screen. Then he looked at the ceiling. Then he said a word that isn't worth repeating. "You're popular," Tull offered. "I'm a problem," Rail said. He was confined to the billet with Sara while Joint Command decided what to do with him. She was in a nest that the three of them had built out of thermal blankets and an empty crate. Gale's idea, well engineered, slightly lopsided. Rail had set the temperature in the room as high as the system allowed and draped an extra blanket over the crate, and Sara had spent most of the night sleeping, which Rail took as a good sign. The reactions coming in from across the Alliance were not, mostly, good signs. The Vorkai official response was a single paragraph statement that used the word incident 5 times. The Renari Collective called it a violation of biological sovereignty. One of the Hendrak Hive delegations apparently transmitted 1,200 words on the subject of why physical contact between species was fundamentally destabilizing, which no one at Forward Base 12 had the energy to read in full. 3 human journalists on the outer stations called Rail a hero. 2 called him a liability. 1 called him both in the same article. Gale read the coverage with the flat attention of someone watching a fire spread and finding it mildly interesting. "The Vorkai Cultural Council is very upset," she reported. "How upset?" "They've requested that a High Elder be sent to formally assess the situation." Rail sat up. "That's serious." "High Elder Orin. He's apparently very old and very traditional. He was not described in flattering terms by the Vorkai sources that were willing to talk." She lowered the pad. "He's already on his way." In the crate, Sara stirred. She made a small sound, not the sound from yesterday, the one that had stopped the standoff cold, but something quieter, a kind of checking sound. Rail leaned over the crate, and she looked up at him and went back to sleep. Tull, who was sitting on his own bunk eating something out of a ration packet, watched this happen. "She looks for you when she wakes up," he said. "She looks for warmth," Rail said. "She looks for you," Tull repeated, simply, and went back to eating. Rail didn't answer. He stared at the ceiling again and thought about Orin. He knew enough about Vorkai law to know that a High Elder's ruling on something like this was final and binding. He knew enough about Vorkai culture to understand what the possible rulings were. The best one was, the hatchling is unharmed, the contact is logged, life continues. The worst one was considerably worse than that, and involved purification rites that the medical file on Sara's current condition, which he had read 3 times, made clear she was unlikely to survive. He didn't let himself think about that one for long. He picked up the datapad and looked at the footage. He had not watched it before. He watched it now, himself on the slope, kneeling, crawling into the crack, coming back out with the small pale gold shape wrapped in canvas, standing up and turning around and finding Vron there. He looked very calm in the footage. He hadn't felt calm. He'd felt the way he always felt when something needed doing, like the thinking parts of his brain had stepped to one side to let the doing parts through. At the bottom of the footage, someone had left a comment. He almost didn't read it. Then he did. It was from a Vorkai biological research station, a scientist named. The name was unpronounceable to human vocal cords but translated roughly as one who measures what cannot be seen. The comment was 4 sentences long. It said that in 32 years of studying Vorkai hatchling development, the researcher had only recorded the sound Sara made, the one in the footage, the one that had stopped the standoff, 11 times total. It said the sound was called, in Old Vorkai, the word for shelter. It said hatchlings only made it when they felt completely safe. The last sentence asked, in neutral scientific language, whether the human soldier was available for further study. Rail set the pad down. Tull looked at him. What? Nothing, Rail said. He looked at the crate. Sara's pale gold tail was curled over the edge, swaying slightly in her sleep, the silver tip catching the light. He thought about Orin arriving. He thought about rulings and purification rites and Vorkai law and the 17 species currently generating opinions about him from across the Alliance. He picked up the extra blanket and tucked it more firmly around the crate. Then he lay back and stared at the ceiling until the light outside the window changed color. Orin was smaller than Rail expected. Most Vorkai warriors were broad and tall, built like something that had decided to become a wall. Orin was lean, and old in the way that very old things become lean, not diminished, but reduced to what was essential. His scales had faded from whatever color they had once been to a pale, dusty bronze. He moved slowly, and he moved like he meant it. He came to the billet alone. No escort. That surprised Rail. He stood when the elder entered, because it seemed right, and Orin looked at him for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked at Sara. She was awake, sitting up in her crate with her wings slightly open for balance, watching the door with her amber eyes. When she saw Orin, she made no sound. She watched him the way she watched everything, carefully, from a stillness that felt older than her size suggested. Orin pulled up the room's single chair and sat down. He gestured once, short and minimal, and Rail sat back on his bunk. Tell me what you did, Orin said. Not demanding, just asking. Rail told him. All of it. The sound under the debris. The crack in the pod. Moving slowly, speaking low, lifting her out. He left nothing out and added nothing that wasn't there. When he finished, Orin was quiet. What did you expect to happen when you picked her up? The elder asked. I didn't expect anything. I just picked her up. You didn't think about the consequences. No. Orin looked at him steadily. That does not make you seem wise. No, Rail agreed. It doesn't. Another pause. In the crate, Sara had settled down onto her belly, her chin resting on the edge of the crate wall, watching them both. In Vorkai culture, Orin said, an unbonded hatchling is not touched by those outside the bonding circle. You know this. I know it now. I didn't know it when I crawled into the pod. Would knowing have stopped you? Rail thought about it honestly. No, but I would have told you what I was doing first. Orin made a sound in his throat. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not one. You would have asked permission to pick up a freezing hatchling from a wreck. I would have told someone. That's different from asking permission. The elder was quiet again. He looked at Sara for a long time. She looked back at him. Her tail moved once, slowly. I have served Vorkai tradition for 240 years, Orin said. He said it the way someone states a fact that they have been living with for so long it no longer feels like pride or weight, just dimension. I have watched hatchlings go through purification rites that I knew were too hard for them. I watched because the tradition said I must, and because tradition is the only thing my people have that has lasted longer than any of us. Rail said nothing. I watched the footage 11 times, Orin said. The sound she made. You know what it means. Someone told me. The word for shelter. The word for shelter. Orin repeated it slowly. A hatchling makes that sound, perhaps 3 or 4 times before bonding. It is instinctive. It means they have found the thing their body was looking for. They do not choose to make it. He paused. She made it for a human. For you. The room was very quiet. Rail said, she made it because she was cold and someone warm picked her up. It doesn't have to mean more than that. No, it doesn't. Orin looked at him. But it also doesn't have to mean less. He stood up then, slowly, and walked to the crate. He stood over Sara, and she looked up at him without fear. He held very still for a moment. Then he reached down, very carefully, and touched the top of her head with 2 fingers. Just briefly. He pulled his hand back. Rail had no idea what that gesture meant in Vorkai culture. He didn't ask. Orin turned around. Under wartime law, old law, rarely invoked, A hatchling found in a combat debris field may be placed in temporary field guardianship if no bonded clan member was present at the time of recovery. The guardian need not be Vorkai. He spoke like he was reading from something he had memorized on the way over. The appointment is administrative. It carries no spiritual weight. It is simply a legal holding status. Rail was quiet for a moment. You're offering to register me as her temporary guardian. I am explaining that such a registration is possible and that I have the authority to make it. What you do with that information is your choice. If I say yes, what does that mean for her? For the purification ruling. Orin turned to the door. It means the purification ruling is no longer the applicable framework. A guardian contact is a different category. He stopped with his hand on the frame. It means she is not contaminated. It means she came through the wreck and found someone to hold her, and that is not a violation. That is survival. He left. Rail sat for a long time in the quiet. Sarah climbed slowly out of the crate and made her way across the floor to his bunk, where she stopped at his feet and looked up at him, waiting. He reached down and picked her up. Okay, he said. Okay. 6 weeks is not a long time. It is long enough. Sarah learned that Gale smelled like weapon oil and dry soap, and that this was not a reason to be afraid. She learned that when Tulse sat on the floor with his back against the wall, he would stay there for a very long time, long enough that she could investigate his boots, his belt, the metal clasps on his jacket, and eventually his beard, which she found deeply interesting. She learned that Tull did not react when she investigated his beard, except once, when a scale on her cheek snagged a hair, and she pulled it accidentally, and he said, "Ow," and she made the shelter sound, and they were both embarrassed. She learned that Rail's heartbeat was slower than anything else in the room. She had learned this on the first night, before she knew anything else, and she had not forgotten it since. When things were too loud or too fast or too much, she went to where the slow heartbeat was, and things became manageable again. She grew. Not quickly. Vorkai hatchlings had a long developmental arc, but enough that the original crate no longer fit her well, and they had expanded her nest twice. Her color deepened from near white to a proper gold, and the silver in her wing membrane spread, so that when she opened them fully in the morning light she looked, Gale said, like something that should be on a coin. She had not opened her wings fully for the first 3 weeks. By week 4 she was gliding across the billet from the nest to Tull's shoulder. The Vorkai warriors at the base watched all of this from a careful distance. They didn't talk about it. They didn't acknowledge it. But they watched. Rail noticed, because he noticed things, and he said nothing about it, because it wasn't his to talk about. Then, at the beginning of the 6th week, Vron came to the billet door. He stood in the doorway for a moment. Rail was running a cleaning kit over his rifle. Sarah was on the table near him, pressing her nose into the ration packet Gale had left out, trying to decide if she wanted it. "May I come in?" Vron said. Not quite a question. Not quite a statement. "Yes," Rail said. Vron came in and stood in the middle of the room and watched Sarah for a while. She noticed him, looked at him, went back to the ration packet. "Show me," Vron said. Rail looked up. "Show you what?" A pause. Vron was not a man who struggled with words as a rule. "What you do when she is afraid." Vron looked at him. "That is all. That is all." Another pause, longer this time. Vron walked to the table and stood next to it and held out his arm, palm up, the way Rail had seen him do nothing before. He held it there, steady. Sarah looked at the arm. She looked at Vron's face. She stepped from the table onto his forearm with the careful, precise weight-testing steps of someone who is not in a hurry and will not be rushed. Vron did not move. He stood absolutely still. His arm didn't waver. His breathing, Rail noticed, had slowed. The warrior had done that deliberately, without being told, as if he had been listening harder than he let on. Sarah walked up to his elbow. She sat down. She curled her tail around her feet and looked at the wall. Vron looked at her for a long time. "She is going to leave soon," he said. His voice was flat. Rail couldn't read it. 3 days, Rail said. "The clan delegation arrives in 3 days." Vron nodded once. He stood there for another minute, not moving, Sarah calm on his arm. Then he said, "She was on that convoy because she was being transferred to a creche on the outer station. Her bonded elder died in the attack. She has no bonded kin." Rail had not known that. "The clan that is claiming her is a distant line," Vron continued. "It is correct by law. They will raise her correctly, by tradition. He paused. She will not know any of us. Rail said nothing. I want you to know that I understand, Vron said, that what you did on that slope was not an insult to my people. I want you to know that I see, now, what it was. He said it stiffly, the way someone says a thing they have rehearsed and are still not sure they can say. We do not have a word for it. We have law, and we have duty, and we have the bond. We do not have the word for what you did. Rail looked at him. In our language, it's not really one word either. It's more like, you saw someone who needed someone, and you were there. So you were the someone. Vron was quiet for a moment. That is inefficient, he said. Extremely, Rail agreed. Vron lowered his arm and let Sarah step back to the table. He straightened up, nodded once at Rail, and walked to the door. Before he left, without turning around, he said, She is remarkable. He was gone before Rail could answer. The delegation came in a gray ship with clean lines and Vorkai clan markings painted in dark blue along the hull. 3 representatives, 2 witnesses, 1 elder of modest rank. All correct. All proper. They landed in the forward base bay and filed out in the right order and greeted Colonel Doss in the right way and presented the right documentation. Everything was exactly as it should be. Oren was already there when they arrived. Nobody had asked him to come. Nobody questioned it. The handover was scheduled for the 10th hour. Rail had known the time since yesterday. He had not slept much. He had not told Gale or Tull that he hadn't slept, and they had not told him that they both knew. And the 3 of them had moved through the morning with the particular quiet of people being careful with each other. Sarah had eaten well at breakfast. A good sign. She had also spent 20 minutes investigating Gale's left boot with total commitment, which was so normal that it made the morning almost feel like any other morning, and then it didn't. They walked to the bay together, Rail, Gale, and Tull, with Sarah riding on Rail's left shoulder, her tail wrapped loosely around the back of his neck the way she liked to travel. She was warm and steady, and her claws were just barely not too sharp through his jacket. The delegation was waiting. The bay was large and metal-walled, and it made small sounds echo into large ones. The Vorkai representatives stood in a line and watched the humans come in, and nobody said anything for a moment. Oren stood to one side. Vron and 2 other Vorkai warriors from the base were standing near the wall. They were not part of the official delegation. They had simply come. Rail walked to the center of the bay and stopped. He looked at Sarah. She was watching the delegation, her amber eyes moving from face to face, reading the room the way she always read rooms, calmly, from her own stillness. She was not afraid. She had become something that was not afraid of new things over 6 weeks. He chose to believe that meant something. He reached up and lifted her from his shoulder and held her in both hands, at chest height, the way he had held her in the very beginning. She looked at him. He spoke quietly. He didn't know if the words mattered. He said them anyway. He told her she had been remarkable from the first minute. He told her that whoever got to watch her grow up was going to be very surprised by what she turned into. He told her the world was bigger than the inside of a cargo pod, and she had already figured that out, which was more than most people managed. She listened. She watched his face with the careful attention she had always watched his face with from the first night. He told her she was going to be okay. Then he moved to hand her to the delegation elder, and she closed her foreclaw around his finger. Not hard, not a grip born of fear. Just there. Her small claws pressed against his skin, and she held on for one long moment, and she made the shelter sound. Quietly, with the brevity of something said once and meant. The bay was completely silent. Rail looked at his finger. He looked at her. He said, very softly, I know. He opened his hand, and she let go. The elder took her with practiced, correct hands, and the delegation closed around her, and she was carried to the transport. The ramp lifted. The gray ship hummed to life. Rail stood in the middle of the bay and watched it go. He kept his face even. He had always been good at keeping his face even. He was less good at it than usual today, but he managed. Gale appeared at his shoulder. She didn't say anything. She didn't put her hand on his arm or do any of the things he would have found difficult. She just stood there, which was exactly right. Tull appeared on his other side and was also quiet. Vron, at the wall, came to attention as the ship cleared the bay. Slow and deliberate. Not a salute. Just standing straight, the way someone stands straight when something deserves to be marked. The ship was gone. 2 months later, A sealed dispatch arrived addressed to Rael by name from Vorkai High Command. The kind of dispatch that came with an official seal and a verification code, and felt heavy even before you opened it. Inside was a small flat case. Inside the case was a Guardian token, the same kind Orin had given him 6 weeks ago, except this one was a different color, a darker bronze, and heavier. There was a single card with it. 11 words in Vorkai script, translated in small print underneath. Rael read it. He set it down. He picked it up and read it again. Gil had been watching him from across the room. She came over and read the card over his shoulder. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know, for a species that thinks we're soft, they just made you family." Rael looked at the token for a long time. "Yeah," he said. He set it down carefully, the way you set down something that is going to stay.